This is called the Coaching Ripple Effect, Organisational Change One Team at a Time. We're joined by Caroline Davies, who heads up HR business partnering at the Drax Group. She has responsibility for generation, major projects, and innovation teams within the company. She's over 20 years senior HR experience gained across industry sectors, including energy, engineering, and manufacturing. Her approach is strategically aligned to business priorities and is focused on creating a highly engaged, inclusive, and delivery-focused culture across the organization. She's worked with executive and team coaches throughout her career to support personal and team growth and assist in management of change and ambiguity. And we also have Jo Hargreaves, who's a team and executive coach. Jo's work is dedicated to partnering with people and businesses at inflection points. Working with senior leaders and teams, she supports them to develop greater leadership impact and purpose, sustainable performance, and personal and professional fulfillment. She's 18 years of client-facing experience in global brand consultancies, partnering with FTSE 100 companies in multiple leadership roles. Her approach draws on psychology, systemic and leadership theory, and is highly personalized the needs and energies of leaders and teams that she partners with.
Okay, so thank you everybody for indulging. Whenever bios get read out, I always feel like, is that even me? Is that what I've been up to throughout my career? So thank you for that introduction, Georgina. Really appreciate that. So myself and Jo are going to spend some time with you this morning talking about the ripple effect. So the definition of ripple is an impact that extends far beyond the initial splash. So it gives you an indication that we've been quite busy with team coaching over the last 3 or 4 years at Drax, supported by a number of coaches, including to a significant level the amazing Jo Hargreaves, who's going to join me. We're going to be sharing our journey together and the learnings we've had along the way. We're going to be tag teaming it, so I'm delighted that Jo made it onto the call, because this was going to be somewhat of a disaster without her. We'll give you opportunities to contribute to the chat along the way, and hopefully, if we can keep on time, we will have time for some Q&As at the end too. So Jo, I'll pass across to you.
Thank you, and huge apologies for keeping everybody waiting. I was trying to get in the call. So there you go. That's an example of uncertainty and working with emergence, and my heart rate is now beginning to subside, so that's good. So yes, we're going to spend a bit of time with you. As Caroline has said, Drax has been working in the team coaching space with a number of their teams really now for 3 to 4 years, and I've been fortunate enough to work alongside them on some of their teams. And we've really noticed there has been a ripple effect in terms of where the sort of first stone went into the water, so to speak, and to understand where the impact has been felt within the organisation, but then also how coaching one team has led on to another, to another, to another. And I think that's really interesting. And we've had a number of observations and learnings along the way. So today we just really want to spend some time with you to discover how team coaching can act as a catalyst for this lasting organisational change and why it might be different. And I know there's going to be lots of conversations today around how team coaching is different from other facilitation and team building, and they all have a value, but we're very much going to focus on emergent team coaching today and exploring why we feel it's a really powerful intervention for performance and for collaboration within teams. We're also going to share with you some of the case studies of the teams that we've been working with. So really identifying some of the key challenges, some of the inflection points that we were working with, and then also kind of spend a bit of time on the how. So how we designed a programme which we feel has derived a high degree of success within the teams that we've been working with and continues to do so. So without further ado, Caroline is going to start on the why.
Absolutely. So with every change that an organisation has, there's typically a why. So I really wanted to explore some of the motivations that Drax had to move into team coaching and to explore that as an opportunity for kind of team development. So I'm really wanting to share a couple of kind of key aspects of this. So just bear with me. So I thought I'd start by setting the context around who Drax are and why team coaching was important. So Drax are a UK listed energy company, the largest renewable energy company in the UK. So we started as a single site with an absolutely enormous power station in Yorkshire in the UK. That was a coal-fired power station that was converted to run on renewable biomass several years ago. But over that time, we've also evolved and grown. So we've acquired other companies, from commercial energy trading companies to hydro assets. We've also integrated our supply chain in North America. So we've got around 1,000 colleagues in Canada and the USA. So it's a business that started life relatively simply, but it's become increasingly complex. We're highly regulated, so we operate within the UK energy markets. So we have a lot of relationships with UK government, and we're classed as critical national infrastructure. So highly challenging environment to work in. We continue to grow and adapt, and there is never a dull moment at Drax. We've always got something else that we're looking to kind of acquire. And one thing's for sure, it's definitely dynamic. We have lots of change going on all the time, and we're constantly evolving what is the right approach. We're looking at new technology in terms of carbon capture. We're looking at data centres in terms of energy production for data centres. So it's constant change, and with that comes a real challenge for our teams and making sure that we've got them in the right place. Our executive committee, predominantly based down in London, had begun using a team coach in the early 2020s, and that was really to enable them to facilitate more robust and challenging conversations with each other. And one of those ex-com members was our recently appointed Group Generation Director, who joined that particular team in late 2021. I was the head of HR business partnering in that team. And really, myself and Penny at the time sat down, and we were really just starting to understand what were the motivations, what has she seen in the first few months of being in the organisation. And I think, to explain that particular team, she had about 4 direct reports within that team. The rest of them were co-opted members that maybe sat in other parts of the organisation from HR. It was also part of the team as well as advising on this particular journey. But we had IT, we had commercial trading, we had logistics, we had finance within there, all reporting into different people, but very much identifying as the generation leadership team. By no way was this a problem team. It was one that was, I think everyone's observation was, it was a tight team, it was a good team, but there was a desire, without being cliche, to go from good to great. So really, myself and Penny started exploring what was the development activities that had been going on within the space. We'd done some profiling, we'd done individual executive coaching. But with Penny's experience of utilising a team coach, we really wanted to explore what happened with team coaching. So with that, we engaged Team Coaching Studio, and I'll explain a little bit how that conversation went and how we arrived with Team Coaching Studio. And that was really the start of the journey. So if you just drop onto the next slide, Jo. Those of you in the UK, I feel a little bit like Chris Whitty in the pandemic. Next slide, please. So I suppose the real critical thing was making sure that team coaching was set up for success, and really building on good foundations. So in that first conversation with the leadership team, it was really listening. So active listening, understanding what the desires, needs and wants were, and really understanding who was an advocate for this. So it's clear that our new leader was really committed to the team and to this. And what we tried to do is make sure that she got a real foundation and understanding within that team. So team coaching was a new concept to absolutely everyone in that team outside of Penny. So we spent some time explaining what it was, what it wasn't, and really trying to define what the desired outcomes were for the individuals to understand their motivations. So really, my role was an active listener, but also a challenger. So to really pick up on the kind of points that were being raised by various people. We also debated approach. As Jo said at the start of the session, team coaching is one of a toolkit of potential development tools. We'd used various things before. We'd used like individual executive coaching. We explored team facilitation. We've done quite a lot of team building type activities. And team coaching really was a bit of a leap of faith to kind of step into something a little different for the organisation. And we really challenged ourselves in terms of what we wanted to achieve. In terms of how we kind of moved forward and got there, we've got an internal talent and leadership team at Drax. So as a head of HR business partnering, my role is very much, to use a musical metaphor that Jo will appreciate and you will all come to appreciate later, is a bit of a conductor of the HR team. So I don't play every instrument within there. The talent team are the ones that really match made us to Team Coaching Studio, who they were exploring onboarding as part of their wider offer in the organisation. So for me, it was really important that I was leveraging my HR subject matter experts and colleagues within this journey as well. And they were providing their own kind of unique insight and guidance to the process as well. The really important thing for me was that we engaged early to be curious in terms of our approach. So my conversation with Allard right at the start was really interesting. He was listening really hard to kind of what the needs and wants were, and made them recommendations in terms of some coaches that he thought would be a good fit for us at that point in time. I suppose my reflection of this is that while HR and leaders within an organisation are familiar with executive coaching, you have to kind of spark some curiosity when it comes to team coaching and encourage them to move forward with an open mind. So Jo, next slide, please. So in terms of the sell into the business, with any business case, it's an ROI. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? We know that there's data out there that says teams that are effective generally yield a higher business return. They're more efficient, they make better decisions. We really wanted to make sure that we were driving better and effective decision making, and that the voices in the team were being heard. We knew that sometimes our meetings were not as effective as they could be. A lot of the same voices were being heard throughout the meetings, and some people with really valuable experience weren't always being enabled to speak or felt comfortable to speak. And we really wanted to make better decision making and make sure that the business was kind of making the right decisions, and they were really robust, and that we got appropriate challenge in the room, and different viewpoints were coming into the room with that. So on that basis, it was quite an easy sell, because while the team was good and everyone was pretty settled, I think there was this view that some people could probably contribute more. So some of those that were contributing a little too much potentially were getting frustrated that they weren't getting other voices in the room. And those other voices that weren't coming into the room were very much saying, I don't feel like I've got anything to say because there's no space to say it. So that was the critical thing as we started to move within there. And then we talked about a little bit in the last slide around leadership advocacy. Our leader at the time really set the scene. So there was a kind of socialization on a one-to-one basis, and then a kind of calibration email to launch the program that went out that said, here's what it is, here's what we want you to turn up. We want you to turn up curious, open-minded, ready to participate equally, ready to be challenged, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So really gave people permission to turn up with a very open mind and to be curious. And what we've tried to do is encourage feedback throughout that. And that's where the emergent coaching comes in terms of, sometimes we found that we would set with a kind of clear outcome and agenda in terms of what we wanted to achieve, but we ended up moving into a slightly different, I suppose, space in terms of what we got involved in, and there was some really richness in the conversations. And I suppose the kind of growth mindset was something really important that we really wanted to push within that team as well. And I think I was also that cohort I was also part of the cohort as well as kind of doing the initial brief of it, and that was a really interesting dynamic. So I think sometimes when HR are both specifying and kind of contracting at the start of it and participants, you end up kind of wearing two hats in the program. So for me, it was really important that I had some psychological boundaries within that. So I knew enough at the start to kind of have desired outcomes and to have an overview of the program, but I didn't want to be spoiled. I didn't want the surprise spoil in terms of how we were going to get there throughout the sessions. So I would kind of have regular catch-ups with our coach after the sessions, but in advance of it, I really kept the outline to a minimum so that I could actively participate. And I made that clear with my colleagues that although I kicked the program off, I was participating in the program. But naturally, being in HR, you're curious. So you're looking at it with a HR lens as well. So you're thinking around, how can I make this work? And my mind's always thinking, and what else? So how does this work for different types of teams in different scenarios? You know, do you push more in this area? Do you pull more in that area, etc.? So yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. And for me, it's been really insightful because it's given me a bit of a first-hand appreciation as to what team coaching is. So moving on to the what. Jo, was there any questions, do you think, that's kind of come up, or any observations that we've maybe missed? I'm just seeing, I thought I saw a few chats coming up. So
if I jump in, Caroline, we have a question just about how you really communicated across the organisation and the teams, the difference between facilitation, team building and team coaching.
Yeah, and I suppose some of that may come out a little bit in terms of the programme design, because with that first team, it was very much an infancy. So we were taking a group that were familiar with facilitation, but not so familiar with team coaching. And I think lots of richness in conversations initially with the coach at the time around the level of understanding and maturity. So invariably those first 2 or 3 sessions actually probably were more on the facilitation side and was almost that internal contracting with the individuals that were on the coaching program, whereas where we settled into it and got comfortable with where this was going and how this was going to work, we definitely moved more into team coaching, probably session 3 onwards. But that was intentional in terms of the first part, to make sure that everyone was aligned and on the same page in terms of where we were going, and almost a mutual agreement in terms of this is how we want to move forwards. And I think that was critical, and probably one of the key learnings, that when you take a group of people who have no experience of it, sometimes it's a massive leap of faith, right? So giving them a degree of familiarity at the outset was also really important, so that kind of enabled people to get comfortable.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. I think that was the key question there. So let's move on to the what.
Brill, thank you. So what was the work? We had different environments we needed to pay attention to, both from a environment within the team perspective. Myself and Jo are going to talk you through a little bit around kind of the different types of teams that we've engaged throughout this and their levels of maturity. We really had to make sure that our approach reflected that, and that we really had the right coach, the right mix of kind of topics and ways of exploring. Some of our programs have very much had an element of, I suppose, specialist support within them as well. So team coaching, but wrapped around with other interventions as well. So very much taking a holistic approach to what is the business need that is being satisfied at the time. So yes, good to great. So team one, and I've explored a little bit of this so far, but it was really triggered by that change in leadership, and really thinking about the focus of the work to get a performing team. So we were definitely norming. We really wanted to get to performing. So I remember a conversation with the coach when he first came in, and we used various tools. We used the high performance team questionnaire to kind of drive some team alignment at the outset in terms of getting an understanding of where we were today and where the team had an aspiration to go. And I think his first observation was, wow, we never normally work with a team that's quite so functioning. Was it functioning all the way through? No, it wasn't. We had new members came and joined, and you go back to the storming phase a little bit with some of that. We have some big personalities in the team, and they can be disruptive in terms of that team, but they add a richness to it longer term. So our primary focus was being able to get that team to integrate new members, to deal with challenges that are going on elsewhere in the organisation, and to really get performance as quick as we possibly could. So get through I suppose, the pain stage as quickly as possible, get some shared language, get some shared learnings, etc. within there. So I suppose kind of I've put together this kind of journey of cohort one. It's a reflection of the different types of activities that were done. And you can see within there that, we did start with the high performance team questionnaire. We did some profit profiling, which we actually found a great tool. It wasn't something that I'd used before, but really started to think about how our team dynamics worked. We worked out we've got some gaps, so they made us really conscious, and that's my HR brain switching on in terms of what we maybe recruited as well. Into the team, what were the areas that we just had a bit of a blind spot of and we needed to watch out for. So that was some really critical learnings right from the outset. We spent a chunk of time kind of thinking about what was important to us, our values, and some really great sessions on those, and really started to kind of build a vision and a team charter. So kind of ways of working, what was important, how we wanted to engage with each other, etc. So and we mixed in some team build activities along the way, right? We have fun, and that actually came out really refreshingly within our kind of team values, that fun was up at the top in terms of what we wanted to stand for as a team, that we work really hard, but we get on well with each other. It's a convivial environment, and we want to make sure that we retain that personality within the team. So we did all sorts. We've been axe throwing. We've kind of done various other activities within there. And I think that that's been helpful in terms of the overall experience of that team, because some of those shared experiences are still talked about today, 3 years later. And that's kind of cemented and made the learning sticky that we went through within the team coaching journey. So that was cohort one, and that kind of led us very nicely into whetting the appetite for team coaching in Drax, and enter Jo Hargreaves, and the revelation that is Jo, who kind of took it forward then into kind of next stages. So Jo.
Thanks, Caroline. So yes, we're sort of now on Ripple 2, and I think the interesting thing about this is that when Caroline were observing kind of how this happened, it almost came in waves. So almost at the end of Ripple 1, pretty much within about 2 months, we embarked on Ripple 2, which was with the Drax Power Station leadership team. And Bruce, who is the plant director, had been part of the generation leadership team coaching with Caroline and the rest of the team. And I think what we observed from that is that there was already an understanding built in by that point in terms of how emergent team coaching worked. So perhaps some of the contracting that Andy Fryer had to do with the generation team as the coach for that was perhaps, although required because obviously there were new members coming in, it wasn't required so much of the leader. And I think having that advocacy and understanding of what team coaching is and how it's different from other interventions, I found as a coach to be really helpful. This team are highly, highly operational. They run the Drax power station site up in Selby, and they're going through an enormous amount of change, as Caroline said at the beginning, where they've obviously moved and decommissioned from coal and moving into biomass. When I was working with them, we were really feeling, or they were really feeling, the ramifications of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and what pressures that was putting on the energy market, which were huge. And they were coming under increasing sort of demand, really, from the government and from other organisations to really try and ramp up their energy provision. So that in itself was obviously one very big systemic force kind of coming into the team, on top of what you would imagine would also be happening from an operational site, where it's highly regulated. Health and safety is obviously an enormous concern, but things can go wrong, and it was really about sort of how you manage those. Obviously, they've got trade unions involved with a lot of their workers. They were going through quite a big dispute at the time. So what I observed coming into the team was just the amount of external systemic factors that were really impacting and very much playing into this kind of VUCA landscape that we know a lot of teams are working within, where there's a lot of complexity, there's a huge amount of uncertainty and actually volatility in terms of the conditions in which they are having to be effective within. So the team really kind of came to Team Coaching Studio with a brief of, we really want to partner together for peak performance. They recognised that they weren't doing it all badly, but they didn't feel that they were always in sync together. And they wanted to kind of really build much greater shared accountability. They wanted to understand how they could be more future ready for a lot of the conditions that they knew were coming further down the line, and really build and spend time in attending to team ways of working where they can consistently be high performing. They're a very results-driven team, and so the way that they worked was in terms of how I engaged with them was really trying to kind of motivate them in that way, and very much with the work that Andy had done with the generation team, we adapted and used the framework. So we also used Profit, we also did the high performance team questionnaire, and I think what was really interesting in that is that it provided the framework and really kind of gave clarity in terms of what the work was and how they evolved in that discovery. And at that point, the gloves were off, because then it was a kind of, where are we when we met with the team, what was going on in their world and what they needed to attend to. But you always have that kind of initial scaffolding at the beginning where you really outlined where they wanted to go to. That happened over an 9-month period, culminating in our last session, which we're going to explore a little bit later. What then followed was Ripple 3, which was then working with another operational team within Drax, but this time working within their hydro division. The conditions of this team were very, very different. This team was born out of the acquisition of Scottish Power back in 2019. So it was made up of some team members who obviously had moved over into Drax from Scottish Power, and some members who'd only been in the team between 9 and 12 months. This was an entirely new team. It hadn't really been in existence for that long. So they were very, very in the very early stages of their formation. And what we kind of, the brief was in this instance was, can we kind of move from siloed excellence to collective impact? Kind of acknowledging there was, a number of highly talented individuals, but they were all in their own individual swim lanes. And they were finding it a challenge, not least because they're not geographically on the same site like the DPS team were. They were finding it difficult to find those synergies to move forward and to evolve into this kind of cohesive, high impact team. The challenges they had were not quite so operational in as much as DPS faced, but they did have new members coming in, and also, as Caroline mentioned earlier, we had new leadership. So we had Lee come on board as the new COO, and that in itself was kind of a real sort of motivation for the team to pull together to really help Lee understand what their offer was and what their place was in the business. So again, we did a similar programme. We worked with Profit at the outset. We worked with the high performance team questionnaire, really to give them a barometer of where they sat and how they wanted to attend to their development. And then again, working through the programme, which we are still on. We're about to commence it in a couple of weeks' time, moving through that team journey and helping them go from siloed excellence to collective impact. Which takes us really to the present day in terms of where we are now, Caroline.
Absolutely. So team 4, here's the challenge. So Jo's just embarked with us on what is quite a significant change. So we're taking a very flexible approach in terms of what we're stepping into here. So this is a team that no one within the team has had any real exposure to team coaching. And actually, I suppose historically there's been some underinvestment in the team, full stop. We've got a new Chief Operating Officer, which is a new role within the organisation that has a strong projects related background. He's also responsible for our generation assets and our pellets assets across in North America. And really, we're utilising team coaching in the first instance to set the foundations for change within that team. So we're going through quite a significant review within that team. So Jo has worked with us initially to lay those foundations. So very, very kind of different approach to what we've done with our other teams. We're also engaging with subject matter experts in terms of projects. So we're kind of doing a bit of a deep dive into our methodology, kind of our sign-off processes for our major capital investments, etc. And then the plan is for Jo to kind of swoop in and kind of pick up that team and really work with us over the next few months. So it almost feels, this team, like we've kind of gone back full circle to where we were initially, and we're taking a whole new group of people on the first ripple again, if you like. But actually it's already starting to drive some kind of shared experiences. They've got close connections with some of the teams that have already been through team coaching with Jo. So I know that there was some informal referencing went on when we were introducing Jo to that team, but we've also taken some of those learnings to make sure that our COO had sent a conditioning email to explain expectations on what this was and what it wasn't to that team, to alleviate any concerns that maybe they'd got, and to really encourage them to step into that first session that was held just before Christmas with an open mind and curiosity, and ready to engage and ready to learn. And actually, as part of that, they did invite me in at the end of the session to do some playback, and it was massively positive to see the impact that just a day with that team had in terms of driving the alignment. So really excited to see where this moves to in the future.
I'm just looking at the chat, Caroline, just to throw any questions. It said, how much time did you get to spend with each team? I mean, the programs were really over between sort of 9 to 12 months. The program with FlexGen has just sort of eked over that just because of a lot of commitments they've had as a team. But we really wanted to try and, this is, again, how I define emergent team coaching to be different from other interventions is that it's not a one-off intervention, that we're not going in with an expert approach or trying to fix the problem. We are working with the team where they are at in real time. So, we want to give them space in between the sessions to experiment, to iterate, to understand kind of what's moving on for them. So, for us, a program over a year, Caroline, don't you think kind of feels the right approach for this particular program?
Absolutely, because I think with any program, just making sure that you've got a clear outline. Typically, classically, I suppose you would look at individual coaching sessions being 4 to 6 over a period of time. I think the same applies, but what I would say from a organisational perspective, having a framework is really helpful when you're selling into kind of leadership and you're getting them to say, right, here's some cash to go and invest in this team. But being prepared to be, I suppose, flexible in terms of approach, and if an additional session is needed, or there is kind of an event that happens, then sometimes we've re-engaged and Jo stepped back in a little bit as we're going through some change. And we've had one of the kind of significant leavers is going to be leaving us. So we'll step in again as that kind of team hits reset with a new leader within them. So I think just being flexible within there. And I can see that Sarah in the chats added a question about how much time was each session. So typically a day. what we would also typically try and do is, with the generation team, we would tag it to our monthly meetings. So we would do a day of team coaching. We would probably do an overnight stay somewhere. And then we would go into our leadership team meeting. Towards the end of that, Andy actually started joining our leadership team meetings to coach in real time within those meetings as well. So for us, it was really important that actually everyone disconnected from the day job, really focused on how that team was performing, and a day was sufficient time for us to do that. I think much longer than that, and you kind of struggle to maintain the momentum. But Jo, obviously you've worked with some different teams. Any kind of reflections on that?
Yeah, I think for the teams that I've worked with, we've alternated it between a day and a day and a half. And we've done that really in terms of where they're at. If they feel they need a bit more time to attend to, we'll do the extra half day. And that has worked really well, especially when we've done some of the work around psychological safety, which I'll come on to later, because I think it's created a bit of ease in the day, which has helped create space. But I think the critical thing that I observed, because a lot of these teams weren't necessarily in the same location, yes, were, but the others aren't, is actually finding space at the end of the day for a team dinner, and actually getting together like that. And so that in a way that, you know, doing 6 sessions within 6 months, or sorry, 12 months, meant that they were actually meeting much more regularly than they had been before. So that in itself was a good output of just coming together. Right, so we're going to move now on to the how. So obviously Caroline and I have shared a little bit about the why, like why the stone is sort of dropped into the ripple at the beginning, and then kind of what are the inflection points that we are kind of working with. It was quite interesting trying to design a program, because obviously the point about an emergent coaching is that there isn't really necessarily a clear agenda at the outset of each kind of day that you're working with the team. But there is always some rhythm, and there is a framework, as Caroline has sort of alluded to, in terms of that holds this together. And I think that, you know, within the VUCA world that a lot of teams are operating within, you know, this sort of need for agility and adaptability is really, really critical. And so personally, I feel that emergent team coaching is really well placed to serve this need. So I'm going to share with you a sort of a jazz-inspired approach to emergent team coaching, because for me, there are huge amounts of parallels with sort of team coaching to jazz, as ultimately it's all about connection, it's about adaptability, and it's really about sort of being comfortable with the art of emergence, where you don't consider uncertainty to be a hindrance, but actually more of a creative force. And when we're looking at a jazz ensemble, you know, they are really finding the groove, and that in itself is a very emergent dynamic process where, you know, they're moving in through the beat, the music, to kind of understand how they can kind of create ultimately the sound that they land on. So there's this really nice balance of sort of structure and improvisation that coexist. And the components of that really are around very deep listening, mutual trust, and this sort of fantastic responsive interplay. And I was sort of, you know, struck when I was going through my own sort of development around team coaching with the team coaching studio, how much this sort of metaphor really inspired me in terms of impacting how I approach team coaching. But as ever, there is always some kind of formula to some degree around how we do this. So I'm going to talk you through 5 stages around how perhaps a team can find their groove. And I'm just going to talk through each stage, stage by stage, and give some examples of what we did with the Drax journey. So the first is kind of warming up and setting the rhythm. And I think this really sort of feels, for me, it's sort of akin to the musicians when they're sort of, before diving into the full performance, they're taking time to tune their instruments or loosen up or get into the right mindset. And for me, team coaching is very similar. So, you know, as coaches, how do we ready the team? How do we work with them to, before they're even in the room for the first session, that there is a degree of comfort and sort of safety already that they are kind of walking into, that they're able to kind of start to find their own place in the ensemble and kind of work through how they are feeling into the space. So we did this in a number of different ways, and obviously this is just how we did it. Obviously there are lots of different ways, which I'm sure everyone has examples of. But for me, contracting here was really important. Caroline, obviously, and her team had done a fantastic amount of readiness within the business, but mine was sort of taking on that baton and really kind of making it into the team. So the role of confidentiality, the role of boundaries, the role of ownership, and really getting the team to be part of that journey. So what requests they had of each other, what requests they had of me, what they needed to collectively own this journey. And by asking all of those questions in our first stage of meeting, it was really able to kind of start creating this dance where they begin to understand how they're going to start working with one another and what their expectations are. We also, as we've spoken about, did sort of some team diagnostics with them using the high performance team questionnaire, which is actually part of Peter Hawkins' systemic kind of coaching. And the benefit of doing that, I found, was that I met with the team individually, one-to-one, ahead of this session. And that gave me an opportunity to really feel into the team, but also gave the opportunity for the team members to be heard and acknowledged. Okay, and I think that's really important, so that they feel that their voice sort of is equal and mattered. And I think that is kind of part of building psychological safety right from the get-go. And by exploring kind of what they felt to sort of, individually, but then sharing that in a kind of more open forum, they were very much able to kind of co-create where they felt the work of the team was. So beginning to establish that rhythm, which is really important. As we move through, we're starting to establish the groove. So at this point of the kind of program, we're beginning to build that team flow and the collaboration, because we kind of know where we're kind of working towards. And part of that is discovering each other's sound. Now, there are lots of sort of psychometric tools out there. As Caroline said, we'd use Profit. It works very well in a team environment, but really what it enabled us to do was to get people's understanding of how to get the best from one another, understand where their motivations, how their decision-making preferences might be similar or not so similar to one another, where perhaps there might be sources of tension and how they could recognise that before the event. And then from a team insight perspective, spending some time understanding where the collective strengths were of the team, where perhaps there might be watch outs and where they probably needed to spend a little bit more time attending to, and just getting more familiar with their sound, which I think was really important. We also started to develop that shared rhythm, so looking at what their team purpose might be, agreeing on team priorities, being aware that they might shift as the process evolved, but at least having some markers which they're wanting to attend to and how we did that. Also beginning to introduce quite a lot of psychological safety work, sharing some of Amy Edmondson's work, working through quite a lot of the frameworks using Time to Think and Nancy Klein's work. And I think all that helped to invite a culture of this no fear of wrong notes. So, come in with that growth mindset, that open curiosity, that willingness to learn, and sort of try and embrace the process as much as possible. And then lastly, we spoke about listening with big ears, and that's really about listening to others more than listening to yourself. And I think, sometimes in meetings there is a tendency to almost sort of respond in your mind to someone's answer as you're listening. So you're not really giving them their full attention. So using perhaps like the transforming meeting technique, for example, from Nancy Klein, and various other ways and methodologies into that, just really started to help the team kind of settle in and establish that groove. Once that sort of rhythm is established, it's what I noticed is that the team then can start to kind of fine tune and how they want to work in sync. And this is sort of where the space is opened up for improvisation and experimentation, where they can start to take risks. And I suppose we did this by challenging the team to adopt a beta mode mindset. We're not trying to get perfection here, we're trying to get progress, and really sort of inviting them to be experimental, adaptive and iterative in their real time together outside of the coaching sessions. So an example of that would be there was a tendency for them always to meet around a board table for their meetings, and actually they chose to push themselves and meet in sort of multiple different locations, standing up, walking, etc., to really kind of feel into where the team felt most energized, where they could really see the most benefit of actually coming together collectively, starting agendas not with just a list of points, but with just one key question. So different ways into how they came together, and then coming back into the sessions and then exploring that, so they could start to codify ways of working that were working effectively for them. And really also I found at a team level and a coach level, because they were now much more in flow, there was the opportunity to find spaces where we could really deepen the psychological safety, which in turn would help to unlock that kind of higher degrees of trust, resilience, and transform how the individuals were collaborating with one another. Full performance mode looks very different for different teams, and I don't want there to be under any illusion that all this is happening sort of, I suppose in sync, because it's evolving and it's moving forward. But ultimately, towards the end sessions with all of the teams, we are trying to get them to kind of what in jazz musicians talk about looking into the pocket. So it's referring to that moment when the rhythm section and the rest of the band find that deep, steady groove together, where every note and every rhythm and every sort of dynamic adjustment sort of happens naturally. And this is about sort of habit forming, codifying behaviours, and getting them to a point where they can articulate what it is about their team dynamics and behaviours which is working really well for them. The teams have done it in different ways, which has been fascinating to observe in its own self. But it's really about this feeling of sort of perfect kind of rhythm alignment, kind of akin to Tuckman's sort of performing stage. And in our last session with one of the teams, they kind of, we invited them to kind of share where they felt they were at the kind of towards the end of the journey, finding a sort of an image that represented where they were, and you can begin to see the direction and how they had travelled through this, and how they were going to commit to embedding this way of being in the team. And I think, that final session is always a real moment for the team to review where they've got to. And actually we have done and will continue to do a revisit of the high performance team questionnaire, so they can actually sort of see from a diagnostic point of view where that kind of shift has been, which for results driven teams is always quite compelling. And then lastly, we're kind of going into kind of what I've called the encore. And this is really where, as the coach, you're no longer with them, but they are coaching themselves, and they are moving through quite a lot of the work that we'll have done with them in the past year, so that they are kind of, contracting in the moment. They're internalizing this feel of what it is to be a team. And for perhaps one of the team's DPS, they took this away, and one of their actions that they put in place was the team's commitment to meet once a week for 2 hours. And an hour was dedicated to checking in their well-being, where they were as a team, as individuals, but then also spending some time on their own growth and development in terms of how they were connecting and collaborating. And they did this. They're a very results-driven team, so they did this by creating a scorecard where they measured themselves, where they flagged up areas where they felt they weren't necessarily connecting with themselves, stakeholders, in the way that they wanted to, so that they can then attend to their own development. And I think, that's a great example of habit building and forming a kind of a tempo that they can kind of move on forward. And they also have committed to checking back annually with the day's team coaching, so almost using that as a sort of a way of collaborating where they are. So getting to that point of kind of creating that synergy and hopefully this sort of seamless performance flow. So that in a snapshot is that sort of jazz-inspired approach to team coaching. I don't know, Caroline, if there's any questions. I feel like
I've been trying to be emergent as we've been going through and responding occasionally. I suppose, Jo, as I was kind of reflecting on what you were talking about there, it's a really interesting dynamic between emergent team coaching and being intentional. So what do you think are the principles that we need to think about?
I think the intention is really about what the work is. So being very clear on kind of the North Star, what the desired goals might be. So I do this with a very simple exercise of where do you define the team culture to be now, and where do you want it to be, and almost kind of creating that shift of to and from for them, and sort of constantly kind of contracting back. And maybe as the process moves forwards, the where they desire to be actually shifts to, which it did actually in the case of one of the teams. And I think, that is sort of part of the intention. So having a clarity in terms of where you want to get to and what this transformation should look like for the team and create for the team. But then ultimately working emergently to adapt to what the needs of the teams in the real time, what dynamics, what environmental sort of systemic factors might be kind of hitting the team. And I think that's really about then listening as a coach and really understanding where they're at, and tuning into their energy. So a lot of the time we'd start there and end up here, but that's okay, because that's where the work was and that's where the team needed to be. So I think it's about, yes, using core coaching frameworks. They all have a value, but I think it's also remaining adaptive to what emerges.
Thanks, Jo. I'm just monitoring the chat, and please everyone kind of add anything else within the chat if you want to. There's a couple of great questions that have come in. So Nick's asked, how did you support or coach the team or leader between sessions? For example, did you join team meetings?
That's a really good question. Yes, we did actually, alongside these programs, coach the team leader. I'm very clear in terms of what that boundary is. When I'm coaching the team, I'm coaching the team. But outside of the team, it was helpful for the team leader, I think, to explore some of the work that was coming out and what their impact might be on that as the team leader, and explore some of those challenges for themselves. So there was some support with that, but very much in the team sessions, it's always obviously with the team. In terms of supporting the team and the leader between sessions, without the coaching, less so. I would follow it with some emails, kind of get them into the space of, were they experimenting, were they improvising, were they playing in beta mode, but really, my role, I think, is to get them to sort of co-coach themselves. I don't really want to step into a place of leadership there.
Yeah, so Anna's asked a question. So Jo, you've mentioned repeating some of the diagnostics, but were there any other clear measures of success that the board required for ROI? Maybe I take that one? So I suppose right at the outset, we kind of had clear objectives in terms of what we were trying to get to for each of those sessions. At the end of each of the kind of cohorts, we have challenged the team. Did we answer the exam question? Because ultimately, there are certain things that are tangible ROIs and certain things that are intangible, and it's how we made people feel was one of the key reasons that we embarked on some of this coaching. Is this team now doing the things that we aim to have at the outset? So the board per se didn't kind of drive this. It was driven by an individual leader within a business area. And ultimately, from my perspective, I would check in to make sure that the investment that the company had made in these sessions. So I joined the first one, but I didn't join the second. I was very much sat in the background. Are you getting what you need from these sessions? Are you getting what you hoped you would get? Is there anything else we can think about and do? So it's a great question. It's not like ROI. We're not buying a bit of kit to kind of get kind of investment back into the business. We're not getting kind of a tangible productivity gain out of it. But having experienced team coaching and seeing how the teams become more effective, the intangible benefits are huge from team coaching. So I think being able to explain that, when I talk to my CPO or I talk to kind of our chief exec about some of the investments that we've made here, there's a real desire and support for team coaching to continue within the business.
There's one from Jo saying, have you found the team are clear on what they want to get to, or was there any element of we don't know what we don't know? Drax is fairly, I would say, as a culture, results driven. Don't know if you'd agree with that, Caroline. So I think there was always an intent in terms of where they wanted to get to. But I think what was interesting is that it did evolve, and their expectations of what that looked like also evolved. So, for example, if you had a word of like high performing, what that meant at the beginning and what that meant at the end actually felt quite different. And I think that's where perhaps the evolution was in terms of the meaning behind some of the language they chose at the outset and actually where it landed. I don't know, Caroline, if you'd add to anything to that.
No, I think you've articulated that really well. You talked about, I'm just seeing, I think that's the end of the questions that we've got on this session. And Jo, we're absolutely on the money on time. So what is going on? So a little bit now, I suppose, around impact. So Jo, we've asked some of our leaders that have been part of team coaching to kind of give us the feedback of the impact that they've seen, and this is really powerful from a ROI perspective as well. So Jo, if you want to maybe talk to some of the quotes within there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of let people read them, but I think this is them verbatim. We as part of this program, but also we do anyway at the end of each as the program concludes, invite the team to come back with their thoughts and also the leader in terms of where they felt the team was moving to. I think one of the areas here is I strongly believe that psychological safety is absolutely kind of critical for any team development, and I do quite a lot of work around the team in that space throughout all the program. So it's sort of heartening to see how that sort of psychological safety created pivot points for the teams that we've been working with. And I think it just kind of speaks to what we know, which the workplace in many ways has a mask to it, and how as teams operate within that, and if they're able to be more comfortable with their vulnerabilities and their hidden selves, then actually there is so much more trust that starts to evoke within different team members. I think also, again, trying to assimilate new team members can be quite complicated and quite time consuming. And I think this process has really enabled them to find ways of fast tracking that, so that they kind of go back to, yes, forming because they've got new team members, but they are able to use a lot of the coaching tools and language that they've gone through to really help them accelerate the team's development back to a place of norming and performing. And that really spending also more time with each other and understanding where they are at, and that well-being check-in that they spoke about in one of the teams, which they're doing weekly now, and how that is impacting the team. So I think this is just some examples of the team and sort of feedback. But Caroline, I'd be really interested to sort of understand what you have observed maybe from a more systemic level within the organisation.
Yeah, I think now we've had 3 decent sized teams through it, and the shared language and the shared experience. So while each cohort's had its discrete approach in terms of how it's got there is this almost a nod as you walk down the corridors amongst the teams that we've had some of the same. So I think that's really starting to drive, although team coaching is focused on the individual teams, it's starting to drive a wider team approach within that. What I would also say is I've noticed that as a generation leadership team, obviously I'm still part of that, and we've got a new leader within that. We've had some new members. We're able to course correct quicker. So whenever we've got someone in, you always get a degree of disruption as you learn to work with a new individual, but we're able to kind of get there much quicker than I think we would have been before. And I think some of that kind of shared values, shared purpose, etc., that we kind of really focused on has been really helpful. I feel like from a HR perspective, I need to do less arbitration. Sometimes people would come to me to say, I really didn't like the way that individual spoke to me. How do I deal with it? asking for my advice, or is actually now they're more inclined to say, just so you know, I know you observed that this individual kind of rubbed me up the wrong way on the call. I'm having a coffee with them. I'm going to deal with it. And it would be very much a sense check rather than a what do I do? I think there is that element of trust now that's built up between the team members at times. And I suppose a very recent reflection, I was actually on our most recent team leadership call this week. Not a regular member of the team, but someone that came in to present, made a comment about blame and suggested that someone was to blame. Now, blame had been a real trigger word that we'd kind of pulled up in our coaching to say, and actually everyone kind of flared up a little bit, but did it in a really constructive way to say, I'm not comfortable with the blame word. We need to be clearer in terms of who's accountable. And I reflected back, I'm not sure that conversation would have gone that way had we not explored that topic so well in our team coaching sessions. And I think it enabled the situation to diffuse and us to have a very productive conversation, because in my experience, when you get in the blame game, it's a no-win situation. So I think that was something that you could almost see the people get together, like without even saying anything. It was a virtual meeting to say, okay, we need to address this in the here and now in a polite and professional way, but we need a solution. We need a solution to it. So it was very, very interesting, and I'm not sure that would have worked that way pre-coaching. And it's also been really interesting because we've brought a new COO into the organisation, and really to some of the outputs of some of the coaching sessions that we've done have been really to ready the team to kind of assimilate that leader into the organisation. His first impression, when we talk about ROI, was it's a great team. I don't need to worry about this team. I've got other stuff that I need to get on with, which was the measure of success that we were going for with our kind of latest intervention. So the original team, we've also done a follow-up team approach as well. It's been slightly nuanced, slightly different, but that had a real purpose around well-being and getting ready for the new COO. And the measures of success that we identified were both from an individual and a team well-being perspective, but also to have feedback like that from the COO as he arrived to say, this is a high-performance team. They've got this. I've got other areas of the business that I need to focus on, and how do we become a self-leading, self-managing team? So yeah, definitely an advocate, hence why I'm here today.
And I'm just looking, Caroline, this was there any connection between the team performance and the ROI of the company? I mean, it's quite hard, isn't it, to sort of tangibly connect into
we had a great year last year, Jo, so it's all team coaching's impact, clearly. So
we'll take that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think, unless I can see any. I mean, obviously, can you share any examples of return on investment? I think you just have. So, here's what are the advantages and disadvantages as coaches being internal, external for this endeavour, such as this work?
Oh, well, that's a hot topic at the minute, because actually one of our internal leadership coaches has just qualified and started to think about becoming a team coach. I think it really depends. We've got an internal coaching panel as well, so and that's always interesting to understand who benefits from an internal coach versus who benefits from an external coach. I think for me, internal coaches are good if they can be detached enough from the teams in which they're coaching to maintain that professional distance. In a smaller organisation, I could see that could be a potential challenge, just because of the kind of multiple connections that people would have. I think the real power that we've benefited from is having people like Jo come in from an external perspective. I am not in any way saying internal coaches can't be effective, because actually we have tens of people each year that benefit from our internal individual coaching. I think the team coaching that we're starting to look at is a little bit more facilitation led and predominantly aimed at probably mid-level teams, rather than this coaching is being aimed at some of our senior teams in the organisation. So I think everything plays its part, but I think team coaching is an evolving topic, right? So and a lot of it comes down to the matchmaking of the individual coach with the teams that they're supporting.
Great. I think I'm just having a quick look. Sorry, a few questions. Question for Caroline. What advice would you give us as team coaches to share the benefits of emergent team coaching with possible clients, especially HR contacts who are less aware of it? To help.
Yeah, I think what advice? So what prompted me, I suppose, to kind of think about it? I think engage them on familiar topics and then talk to them around. So like anything, get a shared understanding of something and then engage and build on that understanding to push them out of their comfort zone a little bit into team coaching. I think that's very much what happened with myself and with our organisation. So I don't think there's a magic formula, but I think the more that sessions like this are run and the more that team coaching becomes prevalent as an offer within this space, I think it becomes an easier job. The pioneers kind of stepping into this space are always going to be the ones that have to lay the trail for what goes first. But I think having some of the kind of shared quotes, the shared kind of experiences, potentially using other companies that have had benefits that you can encourage to network, I think that's always good. There's some great networking sites out there from the UK perspective. You know, I'm a member of HR Ninjas, and there's various other kind of forums out there. Word spreads really quickly, so get some advocates in the HR space, because as HR a lot like to talk to each other.
Love it. I'm just thinking of our time, Caroline, and we are actually ahead, which is extraordinary. No. We would be. So I think what we might do is go back, because I'm really interested to see what people think about this question, the audience, which is, what do you consider to be the role of the team coach in kind of the jazz ensemble as I've described it? Would love to hear what people's thoughts are around that question. Maybe just put it in the chat if you've got any thoughts.
It's Georgina here, Jo. Would you like a couple of people to come off mute and to hear some voices?
Yes, we're very welcome
to chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're willing to be seen, do come off mute, put your camera on briefly, or put comments, questions in the chat. Let's just go back to that slide, Jo, where you had the question you were asking.
Yes, there you go. Sorry. Thank you.
Beautiful question. Yeah.
Conductor and sound check. I'm liking the sound check. Piano tuner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Instruments. Yeah. Setting the tempo. The stage. Nice. Yeah, whatever instrument is missing. Yeah, bringing the voices in which aren't being heard, or the moves that aren't being played. Yeah, I think listening for the underlying rhythm, you know, really what's possible beyond what's being heard right now. I think that's really important. Understanding what figure is emerging for the team and helping them connect into that. Yeah, creating the space for the musicians to jam. I think it's the space, but also the sort of, again, that's where the psychological work is so important, kind of creating the safety that actually if they make a mistake, it doesn't matter. That's all part of the learning, and it's really rich. Audience buying a ticket, sound check. Oh, I love this. This is great.
Buying a ticket, Jo, I'm intrigued as to...
Yeah, inviting a pathway for them to find their own way. Absolutely. I think that's really important. And responding to the performance. Yeah, I think what in terms of responding to the performance, what we did some live action coaching where they actually in the day that we were with them, they actually had a sort of one of their SLT meetings, which I observed, and they were actually dialing out and speaking with sort of, you know, different kind of cross-functional teams as part of that meeting. And that was really interesting because I was able then to observe them in action and give them sort of real-time feedback, and they were able to all sort of in the moment and kind of adapt with us and go, okay, what might we do differently? That's always fantastic work to do with them. Great, awesome, lovely ideas. Thank you, everybody. There's so many, I can't read them all. Great. Okay, so we're just going to very quickly end on learnings, and then would love to open up for lots of questions if there are any. I know we've been going through them as we've been discussing it as we go along. So Caroline, we banded this around together.
Yeah.
Where do we get to? You can start.
So, critical, fundamental trust with the coach, but trust amongst the team members as well, and trust in the intent of the organisation. Without any of those, you are not going to have a successful team coaching journey. So I think never underestimate the effort that should go into this part, in terms of building that trust, building the psychological safety within the teams, and building that trust that the organisation has good intent. Team coaching for me shouldn't be used as a fix. It isn't about fixing. This is about kind of team development, team engagement, etc. So ensuring that message is really clear right at the outset.
Yeah. And I think I build on that in that as the coach, you have to trust the team has everything they need within them. So, you know, exactly to your point, I'm not going to fix them. I'm not going to advise. I am there to partner and walk alongside them through this journey so that they can discover for themselves and build that awareness, because with that awareness comes choice. Okay. And they can make the choice. They can decide how they're going to use that awareness to propel them forward in whatever way they see fit. So, you know, my role very much is to trust them, and hope that they trust me in terms of being able to kind of take them to places which sometimes do feel uncomfortable, and sometimes I do ask them to sit in the fire, which isn't a nice place to sit. But actually, in doing so, they're kind of working through where they need to be and trusting the process to kind of get them to hopefully to that sort of team of real adding value and performance into a business.
Absolutely. So location, I suppose. We've had the good, the bad and the ugly in terms of some of our experiences. In my experience, the good, we used some beautiful locations. The Lodge on Loch Lomond was kind of one of the first that we went to. It was spectacular, and Joe's got the picture there in front of you. The room itself was perfect, so really peaceful, away from the hubbub of the hotel. Great natural daylight coming in, big enough to move around. Decent catering, good coffee. All those things matter. I think we've then had some other experiences where we thought we'd booked a really beautiful meeting room in London at one of our kind of member organisations that we're a member of. It was a basement. And what I will say, that had a direct impact in terms of the energy levels within the team. There's quite a lot of stress within the team that day, and I do think that the environment that we were within contributed to that. We still got a productive session out of it because we do have this kind of delivery mindset, and we kind of will get what we need to from it. I don't think we got there in the most effective way that particular day, and I think the environment contributed to that. Joe's recounted tales of the Virgin Airlines passing out parades and going on in the hotel around her. And then I think we had one where I'd used it in a prior session with Andy Fryer at the outset. Great location for the summer, less so in the winter. The great location for the summer was because of access to outdoors. Not such a great environment when you've got a funeral wake going on and it's the middle of winter. So I think pick your location carefully. it's always worth getting off-site if possible, because you need to remove the team from day-to-day distractions.
Yeah, and I think, what I've done more so as we've moved through this process is really kind of work with the Drax team to identify some of the better venues in terms of what works well, and fed that back so that they have that kind of resource as well. And I think, it's really important. I do a lot of work. I'm trained in Nancy Klein. So, one of the 10 components is around the kind of physical space and creating this thinking environment. And I think the more time you spend doing that in advance and really working with the teams and helping them choose a venue which is going to work for everybody, it does make, to your point, Caroline, the sessions run more smoothly. And I think it just enables people to tune in more quickly without having that distraction, without having the interference that they have in their everyday lives anyway. So how do we kind of create some of that sort of solace and ease for them in that space, which I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Then
So,
more
go on.
They go on.
No, you go. This is your kind of terminology, Jo, but I absolutely love it. So you explain.
So for me, yes. How do I explain this? I think the oak tree is very stoic. It's quite unyielding to a lot of the energies and winds around it. And I think, there is some robustness around that and some resilience, which I think is really admirable. But I think also sometimes it can perhaps be a bit too unyielding, and it sort of buffers itself against the winds. And I think what I loved about the willow tree when I was looking at it is that it allows the kind of the winds can move through it, so you can dance with the winds. And I think that's really important with emergent coaching, because yes, you can be clear on the purpose at the outcome, and you can contract the desired outcomes that you want, and that's all well and good, but everything can turn on a dime. And I think, we are working in a very changing landscape. A lot of the teams that we're working with are working within rapid change. So for us to be able to be fully emergent and, as I say, dance with the winds and be responsive and dynamic to where their needs are, I think is really important. And it only mirrors what conditions they're seeing in the real world anyway. So, helping the teams, navigate that by allowing them to have greater resilience and more adaptability, I think is really important. So yeah, that was one of our key learnings. And then lastly, always be contracting. We did love some contracting.
Contracting at the start, contracting throughout, contracting at the end of a session, contracting with the teams. I think it is really, really important that everyone understands boundaries, roles, who has ownership and who has responsibility for the programme of activity. I think myself and Jo had a really, really interesting conversation at the start of the latest cohort that are going through, because I'm in a unique kind of situation with this one, that I'm leading an organisational review of that team. I've stepped in to kind of mentor some of those team members as well, and I've briefed Jo in on the kind of team coaching requirements. But because there's a baton being passed between Jo and a subject matter expert that's coming in to run facilitation sessions, there was a requirement for me to have a handshake with the team at the end, because I will be the continuum between the two. So we spent a long time kind of working out what that looked like, what it felt like. And Jo spent a bit of time at the start of that session contracting with that team around how they wanted that to play out, because I was really conscious that my boundaries were not there to kind of breach their confidentiality, to breach that trust. So how do you get people comfortable with that? And I think that was a prime example of where contracting has to be done so carefully, because you have to respect the integrity of the work that the team coach is doing.
Yeah. Great. So really happy, Caroline and Georgina, to open up for any other questions that might have arisen as we've been discussing. Thank you for listening. It feels like we've been talking for a very long time. So thank you for your attention.
That was absolutely incredible. What an extraordinary presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure there's loads of questions. So yeah, do feel free to post them in the chat, and Caroline Duffy's going to monitor the chat and call them out. Or if you'd like to put yourself off mute, and let's hear some voices. Perhaps put your hand up so we can see you, because there's a lot of people with us today. You know, using the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to come on. Geraldine, I can see you there.
Hi, good morning. So first of all, Caroline and Jo, thank you. I've been sitting here listening to the two of you and just reflecting on my own work with teams and taking notes and going, okay, yep, I'm taking that. I'm going to remember to do that next time because I've done it before and I've forgotten. So thank you so much. It's been absolutely a fabulous start to the day. My question is, you were just talking about handshake, Caroline, and I'm wondering about endings with teams. So I'm wondering how you've approached that.
Gently, because people don't like endings, right?
I'm in.
I think it is always useful to almost celebrate the journey at the end. So I think for us, we've taken the opportunity to kind of in the last session reflect on our journey so far, where we've come from, where did we get to where we wanted to, and actually sometimes there's an acknowledgement that you didn't quite achieve what you set out to, and that's the real world, right? We all live in. So making sure that we acknowledge that and we reconcile that at times, but that we take the time to thank the coach and thank them for their contribution to the team. And I suppose acknowledge each other and how far the individuals within that team have come. We may choose to use kind of a reassessment of, say, the high performing team questionnaire at times if that's appropriate. But really, the kind of richness is in the conversation. Jo, not sure if there's anything you want to build on that.
No, I think the only thing is we're about to embark on a piece of work with one of the teams where the team leader is leaving, so that does feel a sort of a slightly different level of adjournment. And I think, you know, and I'm sure we're all aware of it, that we've been in teams where the endings haven't been attended to appropriately or in a way which serves the team. So I do think there's real work to be done there. And actually we are running a whole session literally about the team ending as it is now in its current iteration, to allow space therefore for the teams to move through that sort of transition period, and also allow space for the new leader to come into that team and emerge within it. So yeah, I think endings are really important, and they have to be done considerately and with, you know, with intention.
And is that in like a bridges transitions model style, the endings? Yeah.
For that particular session, yes, we are actually using that as one of the frameworks to kind of give it some structure.
Wonderful. Let's invite Michelle in. Michelle.
Thank you very much. Fantastic session, Jo and Caroline. Really enjoyed your learnings. I'm curious, is there a future plan as you work with different teams to approach it with a team of teams approach and the collective learning between the teams and how you can, you know, share that learning in the future?
Great question. I think because of the nature of, we've had quite a lot of change. We've had leadership changes. We're going to embark on more leadership changes. It's never quite felt like the right time to step into that. I'm not sure that we've really given that due consideration, in fairness, Michelle. I think that it's a great kind of thought that you've given me there around, is there something that we do there that kind of brings the group together? They do come together informally, but I'm not sure that we've done a great enough job actually of kind of, I suppose, really exploring, do we want a network? Because I think part of the challenge is also maintaining the team integrity. You know, that is a team that is going through that journey, and they've all been slightly nuanced and slightly different. But I do think they all already kind of semi-identify as a bit of a club, right? We've all had some special love and attention, and we've all benefited from it. So yeah, great kind of question, and definitely one I'm going to reflect and think on, and maybe myself and Jo will kind of explore that opportunity. I think you kind of reflected as we were getting feedback, didn't you, Jo?
Yes, and actually, a lot of the processes or tools that we use, like for example, you can do that. So but yeah, I'd love to do that. I think that would be real.
Wonderful. And I so appreciate how you're demonstrating a growth mindset in action, and how there's always more we can learn as the coach and the sponsor. We've got another one with a hand up. Jennifer Campion, you had your hand up. Are you still coming in, Jen? No, if not, then Manon, you've got your hand up. Perhaps you can pop your camera on and your mute off so we can hear you. I can't hear you, Manon, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you for sharing. It was really very interesting to hear you both. I was wondering regarding the physical space to bring the people together, as I have a lot of hybrid teams and the company does not support any additional cost there to bring them physically together, unfortunately, because I really see the benefit of that. So how can we have some good alternatives there so we really get people off their phones and other distractions and not feel this fatigue being on camera during these hours, and create that, more like this Zen space as you can create in such beautiful spaces? What specific advice can you give us here?
Manuel, I think that's a really good question, and I think it's got quite a challenging one. I know obviously there's a lot of hybrid working and teams which are geographically dispersed. I mean, I think obviously wherever possible, in person always has a certain sort of power to it. But I did quite a lot of coaching in lockdown, and we had to do that obviously virtually. One of the things I invited people to do is actually to choose a background and maybe get a lovely image of something which they felt connected to them. So it kind of creates an immediate dialogue in terms of a richness of a space which they feel comfortable within, and tried to encourage them to share that as much as possible, to allow everybody to see part of what was on their walls behind, if they were happy to do so, just to kind of to create that kind of conversation starter, but also really inviting people in. And I don't know if others find this, but I do a lot of my one-to-one coaching now online, and I think it's a really beautiful space. I think it can a real sense of sort of intimacy that you don't necessarily always get in sort of offices, for example. So I think there are ways of doing it, but I think you have to be more mindful of the time. I think that you have to build in breaks, and that you have to create different ways of getting them to be a part of the session, rather than trying to kind of create those sort of experiments in the session so that they kind of constantly engaged in it. But it is difficult. I do appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much, Jo. We've got two more, but let's take two more questions, if that's all right with you, Jo and Caroline. Jennifer's back with us now. Jennifer Campion.
Hi, sorry about that, a school phone call. Thank you both. You've just been amazing at bringing like complexity to life in a really clear way. So thank you. I was really drawn to one of the comments and the feedback around the psychological safety, and I suppose something specific was referenced to the half day. I suppose what's on my mind is teams that might personally know each other or spend time in meetings together, but there's not that depth of psychological safety. They're more kind of friendly or kind of can have a conversation. Just in terms of kind of what approach you took, both kind of, you mentioned standing in the fire, Jo, there's obviously those moments of building psychological safety, but was there anything a bit maybe more pointed that you did that really seemed to lift that team in particular?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, psychological safety sort of flows all the way through all the work that I do with my teams. But there are a number of exercises which I it's really finding the space. And as a coach, it's always slightly nerve-wracking doing it, because you never know where it's going to go. And also, I have to role model it. So I have of myself in that moment too. Which again, there is discomfort in that, really showing vulnerability in that kind of state of rawness is really unnerving. But I think, it's about really tuning in to where that team is. And sometimes you just can't do it and it's not the right time to do it. So it's not something that I just go, I've got to put this as an exercise in. It's very much feeling into the space. And if I feel that the conditions are right, and I mean, that's the conditions in all sense of the word are right, then I will put it in, still with a little bit of trepidation, but I'm amazed at what it unfolds and how it can take the team into a real depth of understanding that wasn't there before. So I know I'm not answering your question specifically, but I think it very is dependent on the conditions at play, how you do that.
What a lovely answer. Yeah, it depends on the conditions at play and bringing in the coach's vulnerability there and the need to role model. I think they're powerful insights. Laurent, I know you've got your hand up, but we're on time, I'm afraid. Perhaps you can pop your question or comment in the chat, and maybe Jo or Caroline would type a little response. I want to thank you both so much for being here with us today. I can see how much effort you've put into sharing your wisdom, and I know how challenging that is when you're both so busy, and we're hugely grateful for the time it takes. As the only gain you both get out of this is the integrative process of sharing. So I'm aware of what a powerful gift it is that you've given us all here today, and we're deeply grateful. I wanted to share, for me, I love be more willow than oak. I think that's such a beautiful phrase, and about being responsive and embracing adaptability whilst maintaining strong roots. Being adaptive and responsive without those strong roots can seem like there isn't a strong enough container, not well enough held. So throughout your presentation, you've given a beautiful example of what at the Team Coaching Studio we call a minimal viable structure. What's enough structure that creates a container, a holding space where you can then work emergently. Always be contracting. I mean, that's come up again and again and again, hasn't it? Trust as the foundation, and how without that, the work's just not going to happen, and how building psychological safety and trust happen throughout your journey. How much it matters to have buy-in and support from the chief exec, from HR, from sponsors. You're not just left to get on with it on your own, and that makes a huge difference. And that coaching is a catalyst, not a crutch. Ultimately, it's about sustainable team development. I mean, there were so many more learnings in there. I could rabbit on for another hour just recounting the bullet points I took away. But a huge thank you from me, from the Team Coaching Studio. And perhaps everybody who's here with us can just give them a big shout out in whatever way you can.